Good evening. It's great to see you all here tonight. My name is Sean Hill, and I'm the director of the Minnesota Northwoods Writers Conference. Welcome to our evening reading series. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones. Okay. I'm excited to hear Claudia Rankine, one of this year's distinguished visiting writers, read tonight. But before Claudia reads, I need to express gratitude. This conference is supported in part by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. So thank you, Minnesotans. We are grateful to be back in our home in the Northwoods in Bemidji, beside the lake known as Bemidji-Gamog, where the river crosses, which has been the sacred gathering place for countless generations of indigenous peoples, including Dakota, Lakota, and Anishinaabe, who remain the spiritual caretakers and thriving members of the greater community to which we all belong, situated as we are between three Ojibwe reservations, Leech Lake, White Earth, and Red Lake. We recognize and support the sovereignty of Native nations. We will continue to work with Indigenous teachers, elders, and youth to protect and honor all our relationships with the land, all our relatives, and the truth. And though Claudia couldn't join us here in the Northwoods in person, I am grateful she's able to join us virtually. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished visiting writer, Claudia Rankine. Recipient of a 2016 MacArthur Fellowship, Claudia Rankine is the author of 5 collections of poetry, including Don't Let Me Be Lonely and the best-selling Citizen, an American lyric, winner of the NAACP Image Award, the PEN Open Book Award, the LA Times Book Award for Poetry, the 2015 Forward Prize for Best Collection, and the National Book Critics Circle Award for Poetry. It was also a finalist in the criticism category, making it the first book in the award's history to be double nominee. Her recent collection of essays, Just Us, An American Conversation, was published in 2020 by Grey Wolf Press. Claudia has also written 3 plays, the first of which, The White Card, was published by Grey Wolf Press in 2019. She also co-produces a video series, The Situation, alongside her husband, John Lucas. She's the co-editor of several anthologies, including The Racial Imaginary, Writers on Race and the Life of the Mind. In 2016, Claudia co-founded the Racial Imaginary Institute. Among her numerous awards and honors, Claudia is a recipient of the Poets Writers Jackson Prize, Poetry Prize, the fellowships from the Lannan Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts. A former chancellor of the American Academy of American Poets, Claudia Rankine is a professor in the NYU Creative Writing Program. I reached out last year to invite Claudia to be our distinguished visiting writer because her work because we work to bring contemporary writers to our conference, writers whose work eloquently voices the timeless and topical concerns of our world, and whose commitment to their work would inspire you all. And Claudia is the epitome of that. So please join me in welcoming our distinguished visiting writer, Claudia Rankine.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks, everyone. You're enthusiastic clappers. I appreciate it. I want to thank also Sarah Dennison, Andrew Clark, Sean Cruz, and everyone at Northwood who made my visit possible. I would also like to thank Grey Wolf Press who make my work possible. And I know Jeff is there with you, so you're luckier than I am this day. I'm going to read an Extraxis poem just because I promised to during our talk, our craft talk, and then I'll read from Just Us. So I have to open that and share my screen. Don't you feel like you're at the doctor where they tell you what's going to happen? And then I'm going to share my screen, and then it's not going to hurt very much. There we have it. And it's the same PowerPoint, but I'm going to go down to this image. Can everyone see it? It's the Titian, Diana and Actaeon. You might know the myth, but you'll be able to figure it out in the poem. So this is my attempt at an Extraxis poem. I have an ambition to write into some of the paintings where Black women appear and Black people. This is called Among the Undressed. And it's not only an Extraxis poem, it also is in dialogue with an essay by Hortense Spillers called Intercities, a Small Drama of Words. Among the Undressed. Stepping into the painting, backing up a moment to its edge. Any further, we'd fall out of the picture. We encounter her, Black woman, be she enslaved or what. Of all the women here, she alone dressed in white and orange stripes, partially draped in full consciousness of her object, the chaste goddess, yet and always still naked in the structures of thought that fix us. We see her clothing the chaste goddess, or since we might as well embrace the goddess's outsized mythic powers, I would go so far as to say we see her shielding the metaphorically winged goddess, who despite her proximate fleshy positioning, dominates in the crash between gods and mortals. We see her, be she enslaved or what, her own dress slipping, rushed into service, her gaze caught by Actaeon, who stands before her caught in the myth. Dear, dear Actaeon, you have stumbled into that which you created. Your pillaging glance, you have stumbled. We must be careful here not to understate the violence you are, white and male, stumbled into the painted poem, lit from the left. Try to see yourself. Throw your reflection back through the impoverishment of history. Under these circumstances, given our circumstances, Actaeon, whatever you might think of your coming state, your bullish metamorphosis, stag, does not destroy your authority, your potential power to come furiously. It is, after all, your dogs who ultimately destroy you. Whether we are addressing you, Actaeon, or not, the goddess knows. She knows. And as clearly as anyone before or since, the Black woman, be she enslaved or what, sees, she sees, has seen, has learned, has lived, our collective history of being raped, whether we are approached by you, Actaeon, or not. Between the goddess and her nymphs bathing in the sacred grotto lives the premise of chastity, even as the nymphs flirt in their eloquent poses. I do not doubt that we must have refinement, or is it confinement, in the picture at the same time that we recognize that history has made peace with. This classical representation, the displacement of a vagina for a face, remains living as far as we, the Black woman, be she enslaved or what, can see. And it is that only, and is it that only one face reflects back to us what a human being is not? In X-rays of the painting, layers of light reveal that the Black woman, be she enslaved or what, naked or otherwise, was originally not in the picture, but rather arrived as a substitute shade onto the body of a white woman in an effort perhaps to normalize unthinkable acts, unspeakable practices. Why is the dog there at the feet of the Black woman, be she enslaved or what? Oh, Titian, the women cannot truly merge, not even here in your depiction of the moment of passage between the human and the non-human world. I don't wish to be unfair. I'm interested primarily in life, living, barely registered, rarely measured, regarding the Black woman, be she enslaved or what? Be she X-rayed or not? I believe that you who see understand what I am describing, as certain dynamics are by no means limited to Titian's 16th century rendering. I do not think I exaggerate the living conditions out of which our being becomes our seeing. All this nakedness stuns in its ritual repetition of loss of control over beauty, our bodies, all this nakedness under these conditions of seeing. The fact that the Black woman, be she enslaved or what, is dressed, undresses me. The fact that Titian addresses me does not redress me. The painting draws from what violence Titian allowed himself to see, thus fating us all to be seeing. See? It is no use trying to remove the violence of the painting, no use trying to disprove it is what it is. It is. But I give you this, given the violence insinuates itself quite differently, depending on who sees. Go and say what you have seen, if you can. So that is my contribution to extract 6 poems today. I'm going to read from Just Us. Just Us is an attempt to create a process of what conversations could look like. There's a quote in the book from Richard Pryor: "You go down there looking for justice, that's what you find, just us." And the just us could be a way of looking, and I think this is the way Pryor meant it, that the just us are Black people who are in the criminal system treated without justice. or in terms of who is giving out the justice. You can imagine who that justice refers to. It's a book that wants to bring forward issues of unconscious bias, how misinformation gets spread, and who has agency in conversations. There's a quote by Paul Celan where he says, "What times are these when a conversation is almost a crime because it includes so much made explicit." And I am particularly attached to that quote because it is really, it's the spirit of it is what is behind the making of this book. I mean, we have no practice talking about racial issues in this country and the way in which they have driven us to the brink of the loss of our democracy. And, you know, we're still there, and it's still an issue that is alive and well, even as the hearings are going on around January 6th insurrection. The January 6th insurrection. I mean, the book starts out with a poem, and I will read that. But John, could you close the window? I'm asking my husband to close the window. It's very active tonight outside. Lots of sirens. What does it mean to want an age? Oh, maybe I should wait till he closes. One closed. Is that better? Can you hear it? I can hear it. Yeah. Excellent. What does it mean to want an age-old call for change, not to change, and yet also to feel bullied by the call to change? How is a call to change named shame, named penance, named chastisement? How does one say, what if, without reproach? The root of chastise is to make pure, the impossibility of that. Is that what repels and not the call for change? There is resignation in my voice when I say I feel myself slowing down, gauging like a machine the levels of my response. I remain within so sore, I think that there is no other way than release. So I ask questions like I know how. In the loneliness of my questioning, what still is true? There isn't even a tremor when one is this historied out. I could build a container to carry this being, a container to hold all. Though we were never about completion, we were never to be whole. I stand in your considered thoughts, also broken, also unknown, extending one sentence, here, I am here. As I've known you, as I'll never know you, I am here. Whatever is being expressed, what if? I am here, awaiting, waiting for you in the what if, in the questions, in the conditionals, in the imperatives. What if? What if over tea? What if on our walks? What if in the long yawn of the fog? What if in the long middle of the wait? What if in the passage, in the what if that carries us each day into seasons, What if in the renewed resilience? What if in the endlessness? What if in a lifetime of conversations? What if in the clarity of consciousness? What if nothing changes? What if you are responsible to saving more than to changing? What if you're the destruction coursing beneath your language of savior? Is that not too fucked up? You say, if other white people had not, or if it seemed like not enough, I would have. What if the repetitive call of what if is only considered repetitive when what if leaves my lips? When what if is uttered by the unheard? And what if is the cement of insistence when you insist, what if this is? What is it we want to keep conscious, to stay known? Even as we say, each in our own way, I so love, I know, I shrink, I'm asked. I'm also, I react, I smell, I feel, I think, I've been told, I remember. I see, I didn't, I thought, I felt, I failed. I suspect, I was doing, I'm sure, I read, I needed, I wouldn't. I was, I should have, I felt, I could have, I never, I'm sure, I ask. You say, and I say, but what is it we are telling? What is it we are wanting to know about here? What if what I want from you is new, newly made, a new sentence in response to all my questions, a swerve in our relation and the words that carry us, the care that carries. I am here without the shrug, attempting to understand how what I want and what I want from you run parallel. Justice and the openings for just us. So that's how that opens up. And I'm going to read one of the essays so we have time for Q&A. I considered reading just poems, but the book is mostly essays, so I'm going to read one of the essays. There's one entitled Big Little Lies, and it's an incidental conversation. All of the conversations in Just Us occurred. When they were happening, I didn't know they would end up in the book. It was only after when I thought about how they were in conversations with larger issues around unconscious bias, racial injustice, different issues, that I then brought them onto the page. I hired a psychiatrist to go over the pieces with me to help me think through why I said or did some of the things that I did, and why she thought maybe others said what they said to me. I hired a fact checker so that I could interrogate and actually research some of the assumptions that I had, the facts that I thought that I owned and could offer up in these conversations. There was a lawyer who I had discussions with who read through the book. And once the essay was complete, I gave it back to the person I had conversation with and said, is this the conversation we had? And would you like to respond? And if they chose to respond, the response was included in Just Us in their words. We didn't change what they said. You can ask Jeff about it. He helped. There was a lot of moving parts in the making of this. I'm also interested in this essay right now, because we're moving into the midterm elections in the fall and then into another election period. And, you know, there's been a lot of redlining and a lot of voter suppression, and there will be more. And short of that, there will be more killings like what happened in Buffalo, in order to decrease the numbers, actually. I'm speaking to a white friend about the class breakdown in the television series Big Little Lies. Economic stability or instability gets communicated by the size and location of the different characters' homes. My friend and I live in similar houses with incomparable layouts and approximately the same square footage. This is perhaps why I make the careless mistake of putting us in the same class category as Reese Witherspoon's character in the show. I say we are represented by the couple whose nice house doesn't overlook anything, water, cliff, or any other natural wonder. This claim hasn't completely left my lips before I'm stalled by the thought that I have no inherited wealth. I didn't have a choice about whether to work outside the home while raising my child, as my friend did, and it goes on. I recant as quickly as I claim the twinning based on the similarity of our homes' layouts. It's an odd error to have made, but my friend and I do have lives that look similar. Both of us are writers with equivalent educational backgrounds, life traumas, and aspirations for ourselves and our families. We have known each other much of our adult lives, and perhaps affection and familiarity made me momentarily oblivious to our differences. Our economic histories point in part to our racial histories. Not that there aren't individual Blacks wealthier than my friend, but typically, even if we arrived in the same dorm room, we don't actually wind up in the same place economically, since whites have a median net worth that is 10 times that of Blacks. Our different races have positioned us in the world in radically different ways. Her wealth goes back to the Mayflower, and her white Anglo-Saxon positioning is how she explains many things about her life. My own immigration from a previously colonized country, naturalized American citizenship, and status as a first-generation college-educated Black woman account for much about me. Any attempts to erase these differences ultimately destabilizes us, because despite our many connections, despite sitting across from each other, we have been pushed out of a structure from opposing ends, through the doorway of our shared culture to sit across from each other. I begin to remember all the turbulence and disturbances between us that contributed to the making of this moment of ease and comfort. After my friend's departure, I pick up my mistake like a snow globe and turn it over in my mind. My assumption reminds me of a comment made by a white man on a flight I took. "I don't see color," he said. Like him, a lack of discomfort allowed me for a nanosecond to disregard history and the institutional structures put in place to predetermine that my friend and I can never slip on sameness. Was my slip up simply a misplaced desire to calcify our connection, or is there more? Was the slip an otherworldly desire to become my friend, take on the trappings of her white life, and form a semblance of equality that can never exist? I understand that my need to ask this question is formulated within a white-centered framework that believes all aspirational life is towards whiteness. The framework of white hierarchy has been behind the making of a culture I am both subject to and within. Consequently, I know how easily my actions could be formed by it. Why not want the thing that offers the most lasting and stable, if at times toxic and dehumanizing, value? The life I've made is my life, and though it overlaps with what's also desired by white people like my WASP friend, our houses, for example, there are agendas that build precariousness and trauma into my professional success. I have achieved that must remain more primary for me. An essential desire for equity and the ability to live freely within the fear of white terrorism literally trumps everything, as former First Lady Michelle Obama expresses in Becoming. Unless something structural shifts in ways that remain unimaginable, the life my friend has is not a life I can achieve, ever. Her kind of security, because it's not merely monetary, is atmospheric and therefore is not transferable. It's what reigns invisible behind the term white. It doesn't inoculate her from illness, loss, or forfeiture of wealth, but it ensures a level of citizenry, safety, mobility, and belonging I can never have. Neither of us is baffled by our particular random, well-earned, unearned, historical, or inherited differences. It is, in fact, my friend's ability to grasp and hold our differences that creates both our facility with each other and our antagonisms. But why, even for a second, translate ease with each other into a state of sameness? If no sameness of status is possible, even within my closest white friendships, how to account for closeness? What form of relation can include knowledge of historical dynamics and societal realities without preventing or interrupting intimacy? If similarity and sameness are essentially impossible, how is difference recouped and aligned with closeness? How do we keep all the differences on the table and still call that a friendship? I long to trust in our feelings of closeness, a closeness years in the making that wrestled racism and racist assumptions to the surface of our hurt feelings and profound disappointments. I wish to stop time and have feelings of intimacy blanket all time, both historical time and the years that took us from our late 20s into our late 50s. But to stop being conscious of my friend's innate advantages is to stop being present inside our relationship. To remember the truth of us is to be in the truth of us, in all its realities and all its stumbles and slips. Then our friendship is what allows us to fall away from the ease of intimacy without falling. My friend already knows the truth of her life because I call it forward. Her ability not to push aside the moment of my self-correct, a moment that happens with language that seems to distance us from each other in its effort to know precisely, points to her ability to hold and recognize her advantages, her disadvantages, her whiteness alongside my Blackness, my disadvantages and my advantages despite our similarities. The two-step, just us, no, you and I, that I enacted is one she, I hope, kept in step with. I doubt she would have corrected me had I not corrected myself. But that aside, together we allowed racial difference, as constructed as it is, as real as it is, not to become for us a source of acrimonious silence. Our fortitude or resilience with regard to each other's differences becomes in day-to-day life our friendship. Still, when I asked her to respond to an earlier version of this piece, she said she had no thoughts of interest. I kept wondering how she, a writer with a wealth of thoughts and imaginings, had suddenly gone bankrupt. Thank you. So I think there is a Q&A at this point, being moderated maybe by somebody like Sarah.
People will come up and use the microphone. We also have El Renee, who chimed in earlier, who will moderate for the people who are on Zoom tuning in.
Okay, that sounds great. And apologies again for not being there. I had
Thank you for your reading. It was really beautiful. I wanted to know if you could talk about the role of intimacy in these conversations and kind of how that relates to either like proximity or temporality.
That's a great question. You know, most of the conversations in Just Us couldn't have happened if I wasn't in a form of intimate relationship with the people, with my interlocutor. These are people who I've known for years. They're people who I cherish, many of them. And, you know, our kids have grown up together. We've gone shopping and vacation together. So these are not, with the exception of the initial essay where I approach white men in airports and talk to them, those people I didn't know them. I've become friends with one of those guys, but that would have been the exception. Everybody else were people, you know, are people that I've been in long-standing relationships with. And, you know, I don't think I'm an easy person to be a friend with. I think that you know, I think I have to live the way I feel honestly I should live, which means I do call things out if I feel they're happening. And so the people who are able to stay with me in my seeing, in the way in which are the friendships that have survived. There have been many examples of people who I thought I was friends with, but the minute you say something, even if they agree with you, they don't want to stay in the mess of that. And that's fine. You know, we all have agency and we choose the people we want to have around with us. But the people, even though the conversations are messy ones in Just Us, they're also with people who I have navigated years of looking at things as honestly as I can. and I trust them to work it out with me. And we've all had our moments.
Hi, Claudia. I wanted to talk about the repeated line in the ekphrastic poem, "Be she enslaved or what?" I just wanted to know how you came upon that line and just the possibility that you open up with "or what," which struck me as really interesting. And just, I don't know, the tone of that line, it's just like, it's a sort of thread that runs through the poem in a really powerful way. And I'm curious to know if that line was always in there, if it was always repeated, just if you could speak a little bit about the kind of craft around that line.
Thank you for that question. As I was looking, that poem was, there was the Titian paintings coming out of that series with Diane and Action. The four of them lived in different museums, one in Ireland, one in Britain, one at the Isabella Gardner Museum, and I forget where the fourth was. And they came together for the first time last 3 years ago, and in a touring situation. So when it was the Isabella Gardner's turn to have all the paintings, Helga Davis was the artist in resident, and she said, "Would you write to one of the paintings?" And so I was looking at them, and I was, Helga and I were sitting in my living room, and I'm like, "Look at that Black lady. What's her deal? Is she enslaved or what? Like what?" What's going on there? And that's how it started. It was like, I cannot say for sure what she's doing, who she is in the court of the supposed Titian's imagination of. She clearly is Diana's personal maid. She's standing closest to her. So that's where it came from. Be she enslaved or what? Like, and that any position that she would hold would be one of enslavement, even if you had a different name for it. So that's where the "or what" came from. Then as I was researching the painting, it came forward that she wasn't there originally, that the position she holds in the painting was held by a white woman. And that Titian went back in and painted her as a Black woman. And so what was that? Like what, what was he attempting to achieve? What did he want? Why that choice? And why is she the only one dressed, really? And, so there were all these questions. So it was very sort of, in part playful and in part a real question, like what, you don't really ever know what was going on. And the funny story about how there was an interview with the Irish curator, because the National Gallery in Ireland in Dublin had one of the paintings, and he was talking about the painting and he went on and on about the painting and never mentioned the Black woman. And so the curator from the British Museum said, well, there's a Black woman, and he brings up the Black woman. And then the Irish guy, I think he felt like he was being corrected or something. He said, well, she wasn't there originally. Like it's okay that I didn't bring her up because she wasn't there originally. I thought, okay, all right, how old?
I'm really interested in the process that you used for this, it seems like for the whole collection or these conversations. And can you talk a bit more about the logistics of working with a psychologist and a fact checker. And then the second part is just, what are your thoughts generally about giving people an opportunity to respond to your work, to nonfiction? I know, for example, K.S.A. Lehman's Heavy, like his mom, who's also a writer, wrote a letter back to him. And what do you think that, like, what possibilities does that open for relationship building, but also for the writing and kind of the continuance of an idea? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I wanted Just Us to be a process. And the way the book is set up with the recto and verso pages, there's the information that came through the research or the fact checker, or, it was one of those really tedious processes of a lot of information coming in. And I don't really think I could have handled it on my own. And I think everybody at Grey Wolf was involved in getting the work positioned on the page. And I wanted, with the shrink and the fact checker initially, to always be in a position of doubt as the writer, to always be interrogating what it is I felt I know. The thing I have written above my desk is, what I know is only a small part of what can be known. And I believe that. And so I was really curious as to what emotionally was driving some of my irritations and some of my questions, and that interacting with the therapist was really helpful to be able to interrogate my own fantasies about what I was feeling and why I was feeling those things, whatever it was at any one moment. And that could inform the ways in which the initial moment got, in the conversation, got dismantled. The fact checker was there because I read a lot, I carry a lot of information with me. I am interested in knowing certain things, but it's a lot of information. And at any moment, I'm saying this or saying that. And I was really curious, is all of it true? Is it really true? Or is it true because I wanted, have I combined information? Am I invested in an outcome? So I'm presenting something in one way or not. And so I wanted the fact checker to bring the actual facts to me. And he was lovely. He would read through the essay and then he would say yes, no, or maybe. And sometimes it was no, and then sometimes maybe. And he was able to do things. He's a fact checker that works for law firms in New York, and he was able to do things and find things that I wouldn't have been able to find on my own. One of the pieces was about when I was a college student at Williams College, we had a cross burning. I knew we had the cross burning. I knew the president and different Black students on campus were receiving letters even long after the cross burning. What I didn't know is that there were 2 students who were considered people of interest, 2 white men, and their names were on the official filings, police reports, because the college presented them as possible suspects. The fact checker was able to track them down as people who are now both of them into justice system. And when you think about that, I didn't include it because, I didn't want to be accused of anything. But when you think about that, people who were suspected of being involved in a cross burning must have done other things to put them as the likely suspects, and that both of those men are now in positions in our government, in our justice system, and hold the lives of other people in their hands. And that was chilling to me, and not something I think I would have been able to track down on my own. So there was a lot of information that came in that way. Giving people the opportunity to respond was also in the same vein. I really wanted not to presume. I know that I was responding emotionally to what was being said to me, but I don't know what the intention really was from the person I was speaking with. And I wanted them to explain themselves, to give them the chance to say, you know, this is what I was thinking. No one ever said to me, I didn't say this, you didn't say this. This is not the conversation as I remember it. Everybody said, this is what you said, this is what I said, this is the conversation as I remember it, but your reading of it is different from my intention. Not everyone said that, but a few people said that. And in Ethical Loneliness, if those of you who have read the book, the person who responds to that, you know, her response didn't change my feelings. In fact, her response made me more suspicious of our friendship, and our friendship changed radically after that incident. We became less intimate, actually. But we're still friends. But it sort of showed a difference that I think neither of us really understood before that moment in time. Though I you know, if she needed me, clearly I would go and help, and if I needed her, I'm sure she would come. But it highlighted some clear differences. So, but I'm not interested in being right. I'm just interested in figuring out a way for me to live honestly among the people I interact with, and also to present in the book just as a kind of structure that says we're not going to melt if we have these conversations. Nothing actually happens to us except that we might feel a little uncomfortable, and we will create a different kind of history that's based on our own truths. And if the friendship is valuable enough, we will adjust to those truths.
Thank you again for being with us today. I wondered if you might be able to talk more about your relationship with research. I know you talked a little bit about the relationship with the fact checker, but just in general in your process, do you write while you're researching? Do you have kind of a research absorption phase, and then you synthesize that and then make something? I find that a lot of writers who have research-based practices can sometimes have difficulty, myself included, knowing when you have enough research to make the claim that you're making, and then when your research can kind of just be a kind of pitfall to not write, to just keep reading. So any kind of advice or strategies about that, I would very much appreciate.
That's a good question. I think like the next person, you can go down the rabbit hole. And you start looking and there's more, and then you start talking to people and they're like, you should read this and you should read that. And you're like, okay. And then you read that, and then you're reading it and they're telling you to read this other thing, and then you read the other thing. And it can go on for a while. But I think each project has its own needs, and there was, with Just Us, I'm often in present moment coming up against new evidence and new articles or new books where I think, oh, I wish I had read this when I was working on Just Us. I wish I had known this when I was working on Just Us. So it's sort of like a sponge. You can take in as much knowledge as the world will give you. But I think like anything else, you just decide, okay, that's enough. and you start working. And then if you need to go back, you go back. These pieces began with me just writing down the conversation, and then they led the research. And I think that was a little bit easier because I was researching towards sort of redlining or researching towards knowing about the disparity in housing in the United States or income disparity. So real questions came up in the essays, and then you went to the people who had done the PhDs on those, and then you would read that stuff, or the fact checker would bring in things. And just emotionally, the emotional life of these issues, it was interesting to talk with my shrink about those things, because we have emotional feelings about the facts themselves, and we're storing those feelings up. I mean, like college admissions, a lot of white people I know, even my closest friends, my most educated friends, still believe that Black people who get admissions into Ivy League school are being taken in, being like taking their child's place. Those kinds of, and those comments slip out. They will say of my daughter, well, she won't have an issue. And you're like, well, why not? Why not? And the sentence just doesn't get finished. So until you have the numbers, you can see, you sort of have the next response ready. So that's how those conversations would unfold, and then the research would come in, and the research sort of helped me with the next conversation, because you had more facts at the ready, but then they would take a turn that I didn't expect and I wasn't prepared for.
Hi, Claudia.
Hi.
Hi there. So there's that incredible scene, I think it's around page 37 of Just Us, where you order orange juice from the air steward, and the white guy next to you doesn't acknowledge why he is seen and you are not. And so it's just a simple question about, and this is on the trip back from South Africa. And it's a very simple question about feelings that have maybe stayed with you from that trip to South Africa. You have that lovely Baldwin quote about the historical echo between South Africa and the United States. And, maybe conversations there that fed the work. And if maybe an impossible question, if there's any kind of imagined possibility of a truth commission or reparations commission here, or because of the political conditions here, can that only ever stay in the cultural sphere, like this moment?
Thank you for that question. It reminds me that I just saw a movie last week called The Great Payback. And it's about Evanston, Illinois, and a reparations bill that was passed there. So I recommend that. I hope it comes near you. the time in South Africa was interesting. I was in Johannesburg. I didn't have that much contact with white people, but I was so shocked to talk to the colored people in South Africa who really distanced themselves from the Black people. And they had been given economic advantages over the group labeled as Blacks, and they wanted to keep that. And so they were proud of that distinction. And that was distressing a little bit to me. But I think a lot about South Africa now, especially, it's because people seem to think that, you know, I heard of, I was at, I had some friends over at dinner, and one of them said that the numbers were increasing in people of color in the United States, and that the rise in white supremacy groups had to do with that, a kind of sense that other groups were going to take over. But, you know, a country like South Africa, whites stayed in power for a very long time while they were in the minority. So why anyone would think that the power structures in the United States would shift, no matter how many Latinx people were born, is flummoxing to me. Because the whole point of the Electoral College and voter suppression and redlining is to prevent one vote, one person. You know, when Mitch McConnell got up on January 6th, he said, you know, let Biden have this election as long as we keep the Electoral College. And nobody pointed to that, but that was probably the most important statement made. He's like, you know, you don't have to kill Pence. We just have to make sure we hold on to the Electoral College, because the seat of power stays with those people. So, so in that way, I'm always invoking South Africa. I'm like, you know, it really, and even now, I don't know the numbers, but I am sure the economic wealth has stayed where the economic wealth was in South Africa.
Okay, we have a comment that has a question embedded in it. The comment is from Beth. Thank you, Beth, for joining us. Beth says, in Jess Rowe's book, White Flights, he cites your call to white people to talk about race, whiteness, and the corrosiveness of silence around what you talk today about as the racial imaginary. I write about environmental catastrophe, which of course has been created by white supremacy and capitalism and patriarchy. And yet, witnessing the destruction of the non-human is so big that writing about humans can seem irrelevant. Still, the Anthropocene is in charge, but there shouldn't be silos. So Beth says, something tells me you have wisdom to offer here. So I guess the question is about your wisdom to offer related to the assertion of interconnectedness between violence, people on people, and people on non-human violence. And she thanks you for taking the time to answer the question.
Can somebody remind me, her name is escaping me right now. She's the Canadian who writes about climate change. Naomi Klein, yeah? Is that right? Yeah, that's right. Naomi Klein wrote a really interesting essay around climate change and the impact on the land. And one of the claims she makes is that it is not separate from anti-Blackness, that we would have, and I say that collectively as humans on this planet, would have addressed climate change much earlier if the impact hadn't first hit countries that were populated by people of color. And that the most devastating effects from climate change so far has really been in countries populated by people of color. And that has slowed down the response by the Western world to climate change. So it is all interconnected. It is one thing, and white supremacy drives it in ways that you don't expect. So I just wanted to say that Jess Rowe is a member of the Racial Imaginary Institute. We just did a series of talks on nationalisms, borders, and belonging, the fragility and possibility of we. And if you go on the website, I'm not sure if it's up as yet, but it will eventually be up. We had some really amazing people speaking to the fragility of we and the possibility of we in terms of violence around the world. And one of the things that came out of those discussions that I found personally interesting was we have a way of creating narratives that want to say that Russia is the worst or China is the worst, or, you know, create a hierarchical situation around which country has the worst human rights abuses or which country is doing X or Y thing, when in fact the structures that allow those abuses are inherent in all of the first world countries, or all of the countries, in fact. And if we could address the actual structures and not get so caught up in the countries per se, it's really about shifting the structure. And this is true for climate change as well. If we were able to shift the structures universally, we would understand that these are global problems we're involved in and not regional ones. And that it is the structures that have gone from generation to generation in the same way that the isms have gone from generations to generations, the sexism, the racism, et cetera, the, you know, anti-Semitic behavior, the homophobia, all of it. It was set up with a certain structure. And, you know, what we see with the right in this country is a desire to revert back to those structures, to keep them in place, to make sure they stay in place, to have government control against rethinking those structures. I mean, you know, that's another way of thinking about what they're doing. They do not want us to reroute. They do not want us, because it would mean shifting certain priorities. And the major priority would be the shift in a hierarchical structure in which whiteness stays at the top and tied to capitalism in this country, but certainly organized similarly in other countries. So that's a roundabout answer to the question of silos and the ways in which we could start thinking structurally about interconnectedness and the global blanket of the modes of violence that we keep reinstating and calling it tradition or whatever we want to call it.
Hello, thank you again for being here and joining us virtually. I know for a lot of us, then your presence, virtual or otherwise, was a huge highlight we were looking forward to this week.
I wanted to ask about form. I know Don't Let Me Be Lonely and Citizen, I've often encountered them kind of with the label of hybrid forms, whether it's a hybrid between poetry and prose or text and image. And then with your talk earlier on ekphrastic poetry or ekphrastic work, I was wondering if you thought that one was a continuation in a lineage of the other. Like are hybrid forms that you work in kind of continuing, are they an evolution maybe of the tradition of ekphrasis or vice versa? And is there something about what you write about Americanness, about the racial imaginary that renders either hybrid forms or ekphrastic work necessary to articulate what you're trying to articulate?
Thank you for that question. I don't know if it's because I can think of other people who are doing similar work who don't work as I do. But for me, it clearly is necessary because it is, and and because I think to go back to the last question of interconnectedness, or I think this is how I think. When I see a thing, I'm seeing it both in all the ways that I have known it, and I love to build the room in which the inquiry exists. It becomes for me an environment rather than a story. I mean, there are people who are fantastic storytellers, and I don't think I'm that. But I'm a great furniture mover. I like to bring things in juxtaposition with each other, and to see sort of how one thing brings forward the thing that it touches. And I think it's a kind of interest in relational, what's the term? Reciprocal relations, whether it be between people or between things. And so the hybridity is also just a love of the touch. It's like, what does it mean for one thing to touch another thing? I mean, I'm lucky to have been in the Gray Wolf family because I have been able to pursue it without too much pushback, no pushback, in fact. Whereas I think in other places, this idea that you have to be just one thing. I think it was Chimamanda who said that we are always looking for the single story. And I am always looking for the many stories that touch on the dynamics, whatever they are. And they're always shifting. So how can you also build an environment inside the text that is constantly shifting, that allows both the literal sight, the mind, the emotion to sort of have white space, have visual cues, have lyrical lines, have a sentence, so that you're constantly in motion and refusing the stability of repetition always and forever, which is not to say, give me a great novel and, I love it. So it's just not what I do. Who I'm a great fan of is Layla Long Soldier. And And part of it has to do with the way she takes documents and runs with the language inside of them. And, you know, she'll just pick up on a phrase or pick up on an inconsistency, and that will generate pages and pages. And it's just really, you see her mind just turning it over and turning it over and turning it over. And I'm as interested in her obsession with the document as I am in the content that she's questioning. So I think we all have to just find the thing that we do. And if you're lucky enough, and I feel like I have been lucky, you will have people understand it and hold it with, you know, be alongside with you in the making of your work.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
I wish you were in the room too, but it feels like you filled the room anyway. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And I wish I were there, but I hope you enjoy the time remaining. Thank you so much. And good night.